Well, we might as well get started, and if anyone comes in, they can join later. Uh, thank you both for coming. Since it's pretty small, we'll keep it very informal. If you guys have questions, just pop a hand up. We can practice stuff if you want, or we can just go through it. Um, for those of you joining us online, this is the low back pain talk. It's part of the injury prevention series that I'm giving for our wellness group. And today we're going to focus on common injuries, prevention techniques, and exercises to treat it. This is by no means meant to replace seeing your healthcare provider if you have back pain. Everybody's pain and bodies are slightly different, but hopefully this gives you some tools to prevent it or try if your back's bothering you. So let's see if I can get this to go. We're going to start with a very quick review of anatomy. Your spine is made up of your cervical spine, which is your neck, and then your thoracic spine, which is your mid back, and then lumbar spine is your low back. And we're focusing on the lumbar area. So you have 5 vertebrae down there. Those are the bones back in the back of your back. If you're able to kind of poke your back, the bone that you can feel, that's your spinous process coming off your vertebrae. And if you were to go deeper into your body, then you'd actually feel the vertebrae there. In between each vertebrae, you have a disc, and the disc is there to provide a little extra cushion, gives us some shock absorption with body weight activities. If you continue down underneath the vertebrae, then you have your sacrum. I think a lot of people are familiar with the SI joint. That's where your sacrum is in the center, and then the ilium sits on either side. And where those two attach, that makes up your SI joint. And then if we were to look down, so from your head down, your spinal canal is what holds your spinal cord, and that sits right behind the vertebral body and in front of that spinous process that you can feel in your back. And then coming off of the spinal cord, you have your lumbar nerves that exit out, and they exit out on the right side and on the left side. So in between each vertebral body, so if you're at L1 or lumbar 1, you have a nerve that comes out the right side and out the left side, and that goes down and provides your legs with sensation and strength. And then if we look just to the side of that, that's your facet joint. So if you're looking at your spine and you have your vertebrae stacked on top of each other, where L1 meets L2 on each side, you have a facet joint. And those joints are just like any other joint in your body. You need them to be able to move. So for you to twist or side bend, each of those joints have to move. And we're going to kind of touch on what each of these do a little bit more as we talk about the injuries. So far, so good? Okay. You'll be quizzed later. So common injuries, there are thousands of injuries to your back. I'm just going to focus on 5 of these guys. So one of the ones that we see often is a disc bulge or a disc herniation. And we'll touch on that here in just a second. A facet joint sprain or degeneration of the facet joint. And so that disc bulge is also considered degenerative disc disease or DDD. And the facet sprain or degeneration is DJD, degenerative joint disease. We also often see SI joint sprains or instability of the SI joint. Spinal stenosis, which is a narrowing of that spinal canal, and then a back strain, which is involving your muscles. So disc bulge. If you think about, you have your spine, you have those 2 vertebrae that are stacked on top of each other, and then that disc in between. And the disc is made up mostly of water. So you have a more fibrous outer ring of it, and then a more gelatinous, watery substance in the center. And as we get a little bit older, we lose some of that water content and things get a little more brittle. And so you can actually kind of create some tears in that outer surface of the disc. And what will happen if you get a little tear in there, when you do certain movements and you compress the disc, I tell people it's kind of like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You just squirt the jelly out. Um, and honestly, most people that are somewhat active in their life, if you were to take an MRI of your back, you would see all kinds of disc bulges. It's normal. It's a normal process of aging. But what's not good is if it starts to bulge out too much and it starts pinching on the nerve. And so that little yellow thing on your hand out there, if you can see it, that's your nerve root coming out. And if that disc starts impinging on that, that's when you start getting things like what people term sciatica, or that pain, numbness, tingling going down the leg. Certainly not comfortable in the back. And so when this happens, most of the time that disc bulges out to the lateral side or the outside. And if you can picture that disc in between here, if you bend forward or sit, which is the same thing, your legs are coming up. But if I'm coming forward, I'm actually compressing that disc more and you're squirting that jelly out. And so if you had a disc injury, you would want to really limit any kind of flexion or bending forward motion, sitting for prolonged periods of time, anything where your back is kind of collapsed down. All of that's going to make those symptoms worse. Whereas extension, or going backwards, actually opens up that space and allows the jelly to suck back in, for lack of better words. The other option would be traction. So anything that you're creating space here is going to allow the disc to come back in where it should be. And people that have a true disc herniation that's pinching on that nerve, often they won't really even complain of back pain, but they'll complain of the leg really bothering them. And when you're working on this and that disc starts to kind of go back where it should go, the leg symptoms will improve, but your back will start to feel a little more achy because it's creating more substance there. And that's actually a positive thing. So it means things are going back where they should go, but people often are concerned because their back starts hurting a little bit more. If you have those leg symptoms and they're improving, then that's called centralization, and that's actually a positive thing. So continue doing what you're doing. If you're doing something and the legs get worse, then stop what you're doing because that's making it worse. And then occasionally, maybe like 10% of the time, rather than that disc bulging out to the side, it'll actually bulge back into the central canal where the spinal cord is. And unfortunately, that's a little harder to treat because then you can't go into extension. You're just still compressing it. And so you're limited to just some traction where you're separating the spine, or just some stabilization exercises. Luckily, that's not nearly as common. So some of my favorite exercises for this, you're gonna see number 1, 2, and 3 are a pretty common theme for most of these injuries. They're a pretty safe thing to do when your back's hurting you. They're nice because you're lying supine, so your back is supported. And we took gravity out of the picture, so you're not compressing your spine. But it starts to get the muscles and everything around there moving a little bit better. So the first thing is just that low trunk rotation. We've done this in class, at the end of class, where you're lying on your back, knees are bent, and you're just rocking the knees back and forth, nice and easy. This is wonderful to do like first thing when you get out of bed, if you've been in a position for a long period of time. Same thing with number 3, pulling the knee up towards your chest. Same idea. We don't want to go into a lot of that flexion because that makes the disc worse. But when you're lying flat on your back and your back's supported, you can pull that up and still stretch those muscles out without compressing your disc too much. That pelvic tilt is the same thing. You're just kind of flattening your back into the bed or the ground, and we're stretching out those muscles without compressing the disc too much. So those are general mobility. Then more specific for the disc itself is, like I said, any of those extension exercises. So getting on your tummy and propping up onto your elbows like you're reading a book or watching TV. And I tell people just try and relax into it, let your belly drop down. you're trying to hold it for a couple minutes at a time if you can. If it feels too uncomfortable to be up there, then put like a pillow under your chest and just try and lie with the pillow there so you're just slightly elevated. And if you tolerate that, then going into a full press up. So you're on your tummy and pressing up onto the hands. And this one is more of an active exercise. So you're coming up into it, hold it a couple seconds, and then back down. Those are ideal because we took gravity out of the picture, but we can't always get down on your stomach throughout the day. So your other option would be just standing extension. And same idea, you know, this picture is a little misleading. He's trying to do a back bend, but all you're doing is slightly bending backwards and then coming back up. And we're just trying to decompress that disc as you're standing. The other things that are helpful in the beginning stages, if you have some of those symptoms going down the leg, doing what's called a nerve glide or nerve flossing technique is really helpful, as well as a hamstring exercise. And so, let's stop sharing this for a second. And if you were to do nerve flossing, we are not trying to stretch the nerve. We're trying to get it to glide, and your nerve has this protective covering around it, a sheath. And when things get inflamed, it stops moving through that very well. And so to improve that, what you would do is try and grab behind a leg. You're in a comfortable position. My toes are pointing down and my knee is bent. And then slowly I'm gonna pull my toes up and try and extend my knee up until I start to feel any kind of a stretch. And then I come back down, toes point down. And so just a nice slow motion. You might feel it in your back. You might feel it in the back of the leg. You might feel it down in the foot. And I tell people, you know, go for 10 to 15 of these. It will change throughout the day. So you're not always going to be able to go through the same motion. Just take it to where you feel it. And then the other helpful thing is just doing a hamstring stretch. So your hamstrings come up and connect to your rear end. And if they're tight, they're pulling you into that flex posture, which is going to compress your disc more. And so you can stretch your hamstring a million different ways, but since you're down here, just using a strap, pulling up until you get that stretch behind the leg, and then just holding for like 30 seconds or so. Okay. These are all more acute phases of the injury. Once you've got things to calm down a little bit, then you start doing a little bit more stability exercises. Does that make sense? Okay. I can get this back on. So next injury that we see a lot is what's called a facet joint sprain or degeneration. This can happen from a specific injury. So if you say were twisting at a high force, you could sprain the joint back there. But more common, it's just some degeneration of your body. So just like your knee, your hip can start to get arthritis, so can your back. And so if you can appreciate where this vertebrae and this vertebrae come together, on the right side and on the left side, you have a joint where they meet, okay? And just like, say, with the knee, over time, we start to lose some of that space through there and the cartilage kind of wears down. And then you have some bone on bone issues. And now when you try and rotate to the side or turn to the side, you're just compressing those joint surface together and they don't feel good. And since that sits more in the back, like if you are able to feel that spinous process back here, that bone in your back, if you go just to the side of that, you can't feel it because your muscles are in the way, but that's where your facet joint is. And so if you can picture, these guys are coming together. Anytime I rotate to that side or I side bend to that side, it's just going to compress that joint more, which is not going to feel great. And so in this instance, bending forward or rotating away from the injured side actually makes it feel better. Whereas bending backwards, compressing that space, or rotating towards it is going to make it feel worse. So kind of the opposite of what we just talked about with the disc. And this is just like anywhere else. We can't change the degeneration that's going on in there. We can create more space by making our muscles a little bit more flexible, and also by increasing strength through your spine. And the more muscle you have, the more space it creates back here because it elongates everything. And so the long-term goal of this is to keep your flexibility and then increase some strength to create a little bit more space for those joints. And so common exercises for that, once again, we see those first three I talked about, the knee rocking, the pelvic tilt, and the knee to chest. Also, hamstring stretch is a big one. I don't have it on here, but also a hip flexor stretch. So if your hip flexor in the front of your hip is tight, it's going to kind of arch your back a little bit because it pulls you this way, and that's going to compress your spine as well. So working on stretching out the front of your hip. We often see with this, one side is a little tighter than the other, and you see that a lot in the hip. So doing that piriformis stretch where you pull your knee across to your other side is helpful. And then anything that opens up your spine. So doing cat-cow, focusing on the cat part coming up, going into a child's pose or the prayer stretch that we've done, opens up that spine. When you do that, and you come here, if it's one side that is bothering me, if I come here and then walk my hands to that other side, it's going to open up this side a little bit more. And you could do that same stretch in standing, just with doing a little side bend away. Make sense? So next one is the SI joint. This could be a long conversation in itself. We're going to kind of focus on instability of the SI joint. And I say that loosely because your SI joint is where in your pelvis, where your ilium on either side comes in contact with your sacrum. And so it's like those two little divots in your low back, it sits right below that. And there is controversy as to whether or not that joint actually moves. Most people think that it does move, but we're talking like millimeters of movement. So when we say instability, it's not like when you tear an ACL in your knee and things are moving around a lot. It's not quite as stable as it should be. You see this a lot with pregnancy. You see it a lot after like a motor vehicle accident, things where there's some hormone changes and or a big force through one of the legs. And often with this, you'll see some muscle imbalances. So the biggest thing I see is someone comes in and their low back, they'll say it's their low back, it's really their SI joint, is hurting. And you look and one hip sits a little bit higher than the other. And people will often say, oh yeah, one of my legs is longer. And when you measure them, most often that's not true. But what will happen is when they're lying down flat, let's say the right leg looks longer. Then when they sit up, the left leg goes longer. And what that tells me is there's a rotation of your pelvis going on. And once again, I say that loosely because it's not like this is a huge motion, but you'll see one side, the hip flexor is a little bit tighter, and the other side, the hamstring's a little bit tighter. And if you can imagine this side pulling your hip forward this way and this side pulling it back this way, it's going to make one leg look longer than the other. And if you're standing and walking and trying to do things, that obviously is not going to feel very comfortable. And so in this case, I like to show people a muscle energy technique. This helps to kind of realign the pelvis. It doesn't hold it there. But it reminds your muscles what they're supposed to do. And then after that, focus on addressing whichever side is tighter and doing some stretches there. But the muscle energy technique, let's say the right hip flexor is tighter and the left hamstring is tighter. We want to engage the opposite muscle. So we want to get this hip flexor to pull and this hamstring to pull so that we get out of that rotation. So the easiest way to do that is lying on your back. Since this side was tighter in the front, I'm going to use the hip flexor on my left side. And I'm just going to push my hand into my leg isometrically. So I'm holding it like 5 seconds or so, relax, and then I push again. And so I'm using my hip flexor on the left side. And because I'm pushing into the ground on my right side, I'm using my hamstring on this side. And after just a few of these, if you were to then recheck the leg length, often you're back to where you should be. Now, like I said, once you get up and you start moving, that's not necessarily going to keep it there, but you can do this a few times just to kind of remind your body what it's supposed to do and then work on the other exercises. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's not bad. Other ones, this is, so like we said, this is usually instability, which means apart from stretching the couple things that were tight, the other things you want to focus on are any kind of stability exercise. And so the first one here is what's called your transversus abdominis, which is a muscle that if you were to cut yourself in half, it attaches to the front part here and it wraps around to your back and attaches to your back. And so when it tightens up, it kind of tightens up like a corset or a back brace. And most of us tend to use the muscle in the front called your rectus abdominis, which is that six-pack muscle or the sit-up muscle. And when you contract that, it compresses your spine this way. And it's not a bad muscle to have strong, but it doesn't protect your back like the transversus. And so what you would do is just lie down on your back, knees bent. And I tell people there's lots of different cues for this, but think about pulling belly button towards your backbone, like you're trying to get some skinny pants on. And then at the same time, like stop yourself from passing gas or performing a Kegel. And when you do both of those, you should feel a little tiny muscle puff up in the front of your stomach, but you shouldn't feel your back change at all. And so if you're lying down, I guess, if you're lying down and your body allows you, it's nice to get one hand underneath the small of your back and then one hand just inside your pelvis bone. And when you tighten up, you should feel that muscle in the front puff up a little, but I shouldn't feel my back flatten into my hand. If my back flattens, that means I'm using that bigger sit-up muscle. And so it's just a matter of playing around with it, trying to not get the back to flatten, but get the other muscle to contract a little bit. You guys are more than welcome to try it. And then progression of that would be trying to add in any leg motion. So you're tightening up and then try and extend a leg out or do some circles. And the idea is in a perfect world, you should be able to move that leg without your back moving. If the back starts moving, it means you've lost that transversus abdominis. Other ones, we've done this in class a few times, the bird dog. So once again, we're working on stability here. So from here, you're extending arm and leg. And the purpose of this, once again, is that you're not moving around. And so I tell people, like, think about a glass of water sitting on your back that you're trying not to dump over. So it's a nice, slow, controlled motion. And you might have to limit how far you're going, but the idea is to not let your hips and everything move. What else do I have in here? So isometric hip exercises. These are great because you have all these rotator muscles in the rear end and they attach to that SI joint. And they are part of our core stability, but they're especially important for this because of their attachment. And so lying on your back and squeezing a ball in between your knees. If you didn't have a ball, it could be a foam roller, it could be a pillow. You're thinking of tightening up your tummy first, doing that transversus abdominis, and then squeezing together, holding it like 5 seconds, and then relaxing. And then you can do the opposite by putting a band around your knees and pushing out into the band. These little guys work well. That makes sense? Okay. I'll let you guys try it after. And then one of the other common things we see, especially as we get a little bit older, is what's called spinal stenosis. And so where we were talking about the degeneration of the facet joints, those are these little guys on the side. But you also have that spinal canal that runs where your spinal cord is. And that can cause some degeneration over time. And you don't have as big of a space there anymore, basically. So on the right-hand side, that's normal. You have the nerve sitting in there, and then you have all the space for it to move around. With stenosis, you have your spinal cord, the nerve in there, and then not much space. So if you imagine bending backwards or rotating or anything you do, it's starting to compress on the spinal cord and doesn't feel very good. We treat this fairly similar to what you would do with the facet joint. So avoiding a lot of extension is going to compress it more so than flexion, but really working on a lot of stability stuff and neutral as well. Back strain. So this basically is talking about any kind of muscle injury to your back. Usually we'll see this, your lumbar paraspinals, which are the muscles on the outside of your spine, the little breadstick muscles. You have a muscle called your quadratus lumborum that sits kind of on the side of your hip and it hikes your hip up. And then sometimes the gluteal muscles as well. These are most common. You see this with people that are out in their garden and bending and they go to lift something, some kind of twisting or lifting motion, and those muscles are in a position they don't like and they contract to try and protect your back. The common misconception with this is it can be super painful and people want to just go lie down and not move. And the worst thing we can do for our backs is not move. Even when this is still pretty fresh, one of the best things you can do is just go for a really short, easy walk. I'm talking like 5 minutes. You're not going out for, exercise, but just getting up and moving a little bit. That helps those muscles to start to work out and not want to stay in that spasmed position. If it feels like you can't move, then things like using a TENS unit, massage, dry needling, things of that sort can really help to kind of ramp that system back down and make it so that the muscles are able to move again. But I think the biggest thing I see is people are afraid to move because it hurts, but that actually makes things worse. So, not sure what that is. If things are really bad, putting like a soft back brace on can be helpful. Heat or ice, whichever feels better. Typically in the first 24 to 48 hours, ice is a better option, but with muscles, sometimes heat responds better. So, and then gentle stretches. This is different than if you were trying to make a change in your muscle flexibility. Gentle stretching meaning like if you're doing the knee rocking, you're just taking it to where you barely feel it and back. You want to get some blood flow to the muscles, but not overdo it. And so once again, you see those first three that we do on all these, the knee rocking, knee to chest, pelvic tilt, and then some other ones, that child's pose and cat cow that we just talked about, are great to gently stretch that area out. A standing quadratus lumborum stretch is basically if you're standing like in a doorway, if you can cross one leg behind and then just slowly lean to the side until you get a little stretch through here. That's a nice way to open up that side and stretch out the muscle. But once again, you're going very gently into each of these. And then I would say come out of it very gently because the muscle will want to guard to protect you. And then just some of my favorite exercises for prevention and as you progress through some of these stages. So like I said, everything we just covered, it was what happens if you hurt your back this weekend and you couldn't get to the doctor. Trying some of these exercises are appropriate. As you get further through your injury and rehab process, then you'd want to be doing a lot more stability exercises. And the stability exercises are super important for prevention as well. And so that's the extra handout you guys got. But a few of these we covered already, that transversus abdominis. I think this is kind of your starting point. So you can do planks, you can do, go to the gym and lift super heavy weights, but if you're not contracting the right muscle, it's not going to do any good. And so transversus abdominis might be like the most boring exercise in the world. You're lying on your back, just trying to think about tightening something up, but it's really important to get that down before you try some of the other things. So I would spend some time just practicing that. Like I said, you're trying to get that front muscle to puff up into your fingers just a little bit, and your back is not moving. So everything's just compressing and holding steady. Going into that bird dog that we did is a nice progression of that. And so you're in a pretty neutral spine. You're not likely to irritate anything, but you're still making all those muscles work together. Another one that I like is doing a bridge and then trying to extend the leg out. And so in class, we've done single leg bridges. This is slightly different. We're still using your hamstring and your glute, but we're working on your core. So see if I'm in the picture or not, but you would come up into the bridge first, and my hips are nice and level. And then I'm going to try and extend the leg out without my pelvis dropping. So if I extended this out and my hips drop, that means I'm not using my core. So you're just trying to hold it nice and steady the whole time. That's a wonderful progression from those first two. It's a little bit harder. As things get a little bit more comfortable and you're able to hold well, then doing planks. So, we've talked about starting just coming up onto your knees and trying to hold things nice and steady. Once again, I'm contracting my core, so I'm pulling my belly button towards my backbone. As that gets easier, you can go up onto your toes. Your rear end's not up here or sagging down. You're nice and flat like a board. And then there's lots of progressions of a plank. So you can come up into the plank and do a hip extension. You could come into a tall plank and do like a row with a weight. You could do a side plank. So now we're getting the glutes involved. And I usually have people start with that bottom knee bent is appropriate. You're coming into that side plank, and then if that feels okay, trying to lift that top leg up and back down. I don't have that in front of me. I think I also have just some chopping. If you have a weight, anytime you get off your feet, so you come into a kneeling position or a tall kneeling position like this, it's going to make you use your core more than if you're standing. So you could certainly do this exercise standing. You're just going to get more core in this position. And so, excuse me. If this were a heavier weight, it would be ideal. But all I'm doing is starting with the weight on my hip. I'm pulling up towards my opposite arm and back down. And so you're not twisting with it. Your core is holding you steady and you're moving the weight, which means you're stabilizing as you're doing this. Same thing on this side. And if you wanted to do the opposite, if you had something attached above you here, you could pull down and back up. So now I'm fighting gravity this way, and I'm not coming here. I'm still holding my core nice and steady. Make sense?
No, so is that attached?
Yeah, so this would be attached to something above you.
Okay, so like put it in the door and shut the door.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Or, you know, something that is secure. So if I were standing, it would be
Yeah.
coming to here,
Sure.
but then you're kneeling. I mean, there are so many stability exercises, but I think those are some fun ones. What I didn't go over was some traction techniques. So if we go back to thinking about the lumbar disc or that nerve being compressed on, we talked about wanting to go into extension is helpful, so bending backwards, or traction, so separating the spine. And there's lots of ways for like a physical therapist to help you with traction, to do it for you, but for you to do it on your own is a little more tricky. A few options that I have people try are, if you're able to get your legs up on like the couch or the side of the bed or something, an exercise ball works great, but just legs up here. And then all I'm going to do is use my hands and try and push my thighs away. And so what's happening is I'm creating some space through my spine here. It's not a lot because we can't move our bodies, but you're pushing and hold it like 5-10 seconds and then relax. That's a nice way to do it if you don't have anyone to help you. The other option would be if you, once again, had this attached in the doorway. This would be secure. And then you just kind of crisscross it over your foot and lie back. And then you just scoot yourself away from the door until there's a good stretch. And it's basically pulling my leg out, like out of my socket, which is decompressing that side of my spine. That one tends to work really well if you can comfortably get in the position. It's sometimes hard to get down there. Couple other options would be if you're in a chair that has arms, you can sit down and use the arms and just kind of push yourself up and try and let your body relax. Once again, you're not able to hold that for very long, but it helps to kind of decompress the spine a little bit. Or like holding onto the top of a door panel or something and just letting your knees bend and take some of your body weight off. Once again, it's separating your spine a little bit. With all of those, you want to be careful that when you come out of it, you don't come out really quick, because if we're taking the pressure off the disc and then you come down really quickly, it's likely not going to feel very good. So make sure that you're in a position that you can control it. Yeah. Sense? So questions, anything you guys want to try?
Think when you're doing them, if you're doing them wrong, does the body always tell you? Like when it hurt, or do you maybe do it wrong? And you just don't know really sure.
Doing it wrong? So most of the exercises I gave you for each of the specific injuries are pretty hard to do wrong. And if it hurts, then you should stop doing it. So, for example, if we thought that you had a disc bulge, you were out gardening, you lifted a heavy tub, you got that back pain, and then it started to travel down your leg. And you're like, uh-oh, I think maybe my disc is compressed. So then you do your knee rocking, it feels okay, do everything, and then you go to do the extension exercises like you're supposed to do, and that doesn't feel good. That would be an indicator maybe that disc bulge is central instead of lateral, or maybe you have what's called a little bit of a lateral shift going on first. And if that's the case, if it doesn't feel good, don't push it. If you're trying to prop up onto your elbows and you didn't like that and then tried using the pillow and that felt okay, then I'd say that's fine. It's just a little more irritated. It's not ready to go that far. But if you put the pillow down and it still doesn't feel good, then stop doing the exercise. Same thing for like the cat cow, you know, if you thought that you sprained your facet joint or you have some spinal stenosis that is flared up and you're doing that and it feels worse every time you go in that position, stop doing it. But everything I gave you apart from the prevention exercises, none of those should make things worse, even if it might not be the exact exercise you're supposed to be doing. Where you could get in trouble is some of the core stuff. So if you're doing that wrong, you can certainly irritate yourself. So if that doesn't feel good, stop.
So what about the pains when you've just been out working in the garden and come back in and it's like, you can't stand this. Yeah, it's just crosshair. I mean, it doesn't seem like these, maybe this is just like muscle soreness. Is that what it is?
So it's probably a combination of some lumbar strain and probably some degenerative disc disease. So anytime you're in that flexed posture for a while and your back doesn't like it, you've probably compressed your disc a little bit. And so that would be when I would try and just get on your belly and see how it feels. If it feels okay, then spend some time there, because then you're taking the pressure off your disc. And I didn't make that very clear. When we talk about a disc bulge, it doesn't have to travel down the leg. That's just a more severe form of that disc disease. And so when the disc is here and it bulges out, it can bulge and cause just some pressure in your back. But if it bulges out enough, then it pinches on that nerve, and that's when you get the symptoms down the leg. But if it just feels achy in your low back, that's often that disc is inflamed. And that's what I was talking about with the centralization. If it is pushing on the nerve and it starts to suck back in, it'll feel kind of achy like that afterwards. It's actually an improvement of what's going on. But in your case, I would start with doing some of the knee rocking, the knee to chest, get all that. Yeah, exactly.
No, while we're laying out the ground.
But also, while you're in the garden, taking some breaks and standing up and doing some extension to counter, because the longer you're in that flexed posture, whether you're on a chair or bent, we're still compressing your spine and your disc that whole time. And so anything to go in the opposite direction is going to be helpful. And then, being as creative as you can to keep your back straight while you're there. So using a stool, using good techniques and not in this posture. But yeah, I would say it's a combination of your disc and just muscles not being happy being in that position for a while.
Prince Fred's.
Yeah. Raised
I
beds.
got tanks. um, it's
Oh, yeah.
Cattle feed or whatever, water tanks, that's what I got rid of my wooden ones that were down here, and these are great, but there's still things like, I've been trying to clean up, flower beds and things from last year's, all the dead plants, and I set, but, I've set, and I'm raking as I'm sitting, but I still came in, I have, yeah.
Yeah.
still, somebody-
Yeah, I mean,
We need to do planks down there.
extra credit to plant a plant in a plank position. There's not a great position, when you're gardening, doing yard work, that kind of thing. The best you can do is keep your spine as straight up and down as you can, but you're still going to be, even if you're just straight up and down and you're using one arm, you're compressing that side of your spine.
Mhm.
And so there's going to be some stress to the spine no matter what. And that's why, like, take breaks often, try and do the opposite of whatever position you're in. And then afterwards, by all means, once you come inside, get down and do some of the knee rocking, get onto your elbows, try and do some extension.
You can't just sit down, take a nap.
Sure.
Or you do this thing, uncork it.
Yeah.
Using your arms.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I would say, that's try and get into some extension as soon as you can. And I don't mean by like trying to do a back bend, just a little bit, get it out of that neutral position, coming back.
Well, it seems like, at some point, someone said, hang on to the kitchen counter and then just straighten out, so here's the counter. And then you just stretch out from that, like that, is that not good?
Well, that's fine. So that would help with the low back muscles back
Mhm.
there.
Yeah.
But you're going into more flexion. And so I would say, that's fine to do, but then make sure that you do something bending backwards too. So if you're at the
Okay.
counter and you do that and it feels okay, great. But then when you come up and the counter's here, just do a little bit of some back bending.
Oh.
And I mean, in the garden too, just stop for a
Right.
couple minutes and try and bend back. Like I said, it's not a big motion, but if you think about your spine like this and we're
Mhm.
compressing that disc, as soon as you come back this way, it opens up that disc a little bit. Whereas as you come forward, you're just squeezing it
Pushing
more
it
and more.
together. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And I mean, most of us have some degeneration through our disc because of our culture, and most of us are in a flexed posture more so than extended posture. So anytime you're sitting, definitely if you're sitting at a couch or on a computer or looking at a device, we're in that rounded position. Whereas we don't do a lot of things where we're bending backwards. And so most of us have some degeneration through there after the age of like 30, naturally. And then the more time that you spend there, the more likely it is to get a little irritated.
Let's see. Bending back. It's a rarity.
It is. All right. Other questions?
What causes a bone spur on the back? My sister had bone spurs, and when they were going into that center part
Mhm.
of her thing, she had to have surgery and,
Yeah, so that's a form of spinal stenosis.
oh.
Just like, let's use the knee as an example. So when you're 16 and you have these joint spaces, you have the bone up here, the bone here, you have cartilage on either side, and you have this nice big joint space. And over time, as your body lives, we start to lose some of that joint space by that cartilage starting to get worn down. And you'll see this often in a knee that, like, if we have some muscle imbalances and let's say that you put more pressure on the inside of your knee, if they do an x-ray, they'll show that you have like some bone spurs on this side. And that's just your body's natural way of protecting itself. There's something called Wolff's Law. And basically, where there's more energy put, so if you're compressing the inside of your knee, your body's going to try and protect that. And so it creates bone to try not to let it get injured. And what'll happen is they turn into these little bone spurs, and that obviously doesn't feel good. And so the same thing can happen in your spine as it starts to wear down and that cartilage goes away and you start getting some bone rubbing on bone, then it creates these little bone spurs. And it's, you know, it's just a form of spinal stenosis or degenerative joint disease. But when they start getting severe enough, that's when you need to have surgery to create more space.
It was very interesting when she went through all the stuff in her back. They discovered that she was born missing one
Vertebrae?
vertebrae. Yeah.
Interesting.
And she said, this is why I'm so short. Because she's about 4'10".
Oh, wow.
She's a small person. But
She have spinal bifida or anything?
I don't think so. That's what I have. We're crooked spine, right? Is that what
You have
spine-
scoliosis.
scoliosis.
Yeah.
okay. All
One of
these
those
S words.
ones.
Yeah, and I mean, we didn't touch on that. We didn't touch on, there's, you know, we could talk for ages, but,
7 years of education, so
yeah.
yeah.
I think, you know, that's a little more specific to exactly what your curve looks like, as opposed to some of the stuff is a little more general.
It's in the vertebrae, like,
Yeah, yeah. She thought so too.
so the surgeon. Wait,
Yeah, wait a minute, you're missing, yeah. Yeah, when she rattled off and, you know, he told her what one it was, or what was missing it. But, you know, if you wonder why, it's just like a birth defect, I would assume.
Yeah, you sometimes see that with spinal bifida. It's as you start to develop, sometimes areas are missed. But
Sure.
yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna stop sharing this. And thank you everyone for coming.